Hello, good evening everyone, and my name is Tenzin Doma, Program Coordinator of Tibet House. I'm going to be moderating today's program as we embark upon the day 2 of the 2-day lecture series on what do China's pre-1949 official authoritative documents say about Beijing's claim of historic sovereignty over Tibet by Professor Lau, former professor of Oklahoma State University, and the lecture will be chaired by Professor Ravi Prasad Narayanan, Associate Professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University. I, on behalf of Tibet House, would like to thank again a chairperson and the speaker, and also to every one of you for giving us time and make this lecture possible. Before proceeding, I would like to make a polite request to everyone present to kindly switch your mobile phones to the silent mode to avoid interruption. Thank you. Yesterday, our secretary has spoken about the overview of Tibet House. Therefore, to save time, as there were lots of people erupting with questions yesterday, but didn't get time for it, so I'll keep this time for Q&A. I shall not talk about today's with the request to anyone who has not present with us yesterday, that the brochure given to you contains all the details about Tibet House, and you can subscribe it to our mailing list to get weekly updates about the program and curriculum courses. And to register for the course, you can email us to info@tibethouse.in. So without further ado, I would like to request Professor Ravi Prasad ji to kindly proceed with today's session. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to see many people from yesterday even here today, this afternoon. Yesterday, Professor Lau had walked us through a very intense lecture where we could see Chinese maps, which to someone like me was interesting for the simple reason we are all familiar with Mercator maps. But Chinese maps are an indication that this is a civilization slash culture that has mapped out territory and territories since several centuries. Which is one reason why, say, in the state where I come from, Kerala and deep south, to date, every house has got a wok where they prepare vegetables and even maybe non-vegetarian items. And the wok in the local language, Malayalam, is called China Chatti. That means the Chinese vessel. Similarly, if you go to Cochin and thereabouts, where the biggest river called Bharatapura, it meets the Arabian Sea. You have in the evenings nets which dip into the water and which are then pulled out when there is high tide from the sea, which brings in mackerel and other aquatic creatures into nets, which are small in size, which can be dipped and then picked up. And these nets are called China Wala. That means the Chinese net. Being interested in China for quite some time, on checking up, one found out that Admiral Cheng He had visited those parts and had left behind these objects of interest which had deep commercial value. So which tells you that irrespective of whoever is ruling China today, the Communist Party of China, Kuomintang, the fact is that Chinese as a people, as a civilization, have been very market oriented. And yesterday, it was interesting to me that the maps China had, it may seem a bit inaccurate to us, but it was very accurate at that point of time. China, like us as a civilization, I hold, is that we are actually Westphalian states, but prior to that we have been civilizational states. So is Tibet. Here, the difference is that I'm not familiar about Tibetan cosmology, but when it comes to China and India, also when it comes to the time framework, we prefer the lunar calendar. The solar calendar was an imposition by the colonial powers. And also in China's case, India's case, ever since in India's case, the British began running the country, the solar calendar prevailed and still prevails. But all the festivals we have, including Diwali, I think later this month on the 26th, if I'm not wrong, it goes by the lunar calendar. Also, our traditional calendar, it begins with AD 78, which is called the Saka era. In China, thankfully, they don't have the Saka era, but they follow a lunar cosmological order, which tells me that China and India that way are quite similar, although we speak different languages. We've evolved very differently, and perhaps the only time we had a conflict was in 1962. The rest that has happened are skirmishes. Hope and pray doesn't expand. Professor Lau's talk yesterday, Beyond the Maps, revealed the intensity which China has on his research aptitude. And this he's been following even after superannuating or retiring from the university where he was. Being based in Singapore helps him because Singapore is, to put it politely, an authoritarian democratic political culture. And many Indians have adapted very well, so have Chinese from the mainland too. And I will not speak any further. It is for Professor Lau to guide us further on his research on the topic that he is explaining to us. When it comes to the time plot, the schedule tells me that he commences the talk, it goes on till 5:30, and then we have a Q&A, which means that it is 1 hour 10 minutes of his lecture. And then for 20 minutes, we have a Q&A session, followed by a high tea. And then at 6:10, we have the final session, followed by a Q&A session at 7:10. And finally, it will conclude by around 7:30, following which there may be a valedictory, or I think there is going to be a valedictory. And everything comes to a close at 8 o'clock. So whatever questions you have, please ask them, so that Professor Lau is in his elements. He is, as you saw yesterday. It's all yours, sir. It's all yours.
Well, thank you very much, Ravi. If you don't mind my calling you Ravi.
Not at all.
Yeah,
Not at all.
and you can call me Hon-Shiang. Well, good afternoon, and so glad to get to see you all again, and thank you very much for coming back, and then we can get into the second part. Let me review very short. Is it working? Let me review very briefly what we went through yesterday, and we were talking about material to indicate whether Tibet was part of China during the Ming Dynasty, and then we look at, of course, the classification, which is the area of self-declaration. Very much like you asked me whether I'm American, I'm telling you, oh, yes, I'm American, or no, I'm not American, as the case may be. And we look at individual events, the Wuzong attempt to invite a living Buddha and then handling a tributary envoys. Actually, before that, we talk about a series of criteria that we could use to judge whether China had sovereignty over Tibet, and we talk about things like taxation, for example, remember? We talk about census, justice system, and so forth. We're going to skip all of those for the simple reason that by looking at those things, it was so overwhelming that we really don't need to talk about taxation because you can take it for granted. In fact, it's true. The Ming government was never able to do census, was never able to collect tax, was never able to establish schools, was never able to do anything in Tibet, actually. And again, as I've said, since the evidence was so overwhelming, we are not going to waste time on those, and we're going to skip to the Qing Dynasty. Okay, so today we are here. Now, the Qing Dynasty question is a lot more complicated than the Ming Dynasty question, because as I said, in Ming Dynasty, even the governments themselves, they openly declared that Tibet was a foreign country, was not part of China, so there's nothing left to be said. Now, in Qing, it's the other way around, actually. For a substantial part of the Qing Dynasty, the Qing government did claim that Tibet was part of China, but simply because the government of China claimed that Tibet was part of China doesn't mean that it proves that Tibet was part of China, okay? I can claim that you're my slave. Hey, you're my slave, therefore you're my slave. I mean, that kind of proof isn't very good. But since I'm claiming that you're my slave, then we need to talk about, more things. So that's a big difference. So over here, we are going to hopefully talk about, again, the first one is the classification, self-declaration. Did China ever even declare that Tibet was part of China? And then we're going to talk about census and residency registry, which of course we didn't talk about, as I say, there's no need to. And then we're going to talk about the Amban, the colonial office. And then I hope that we'll have time to talk about the Zhandui Wars, which I think most of you have never heard of. How many of you have heard of the Zhandui Wars? Probably nobody, okay? But actually, I will show you that that is actually very important for understanding the China-Tibet relationship, and also to judge not only the credibility of China's claim of sovereignty, but also the behavior of the Qing Empire, which is rather sort of amusing, I think. So anyway, let's move on to the first part, and that's very similar to the Ming question. Right now, we have the Qing, and that is, how did China treat Tibet in their maps and in their geographic publications. Again, I want to introduce, remember we spent some time talking about historiography, and that is, which are the authoritative books. We shouldn't just pick any lousy book and say, hey, this book says what, who cares what this book says what, okay, the book has no stature. So another series of books that is traditionally considered as the most authoritative publications of each respective dynasty are the comprehensive references, okay? In Chinese, it's called Hui Dian, okay? These comprehensive references, they go again, the tradition goes way back. So the earlier one will be the Tang Liu Dian, the Tang Dynasty, they have the Hui Dian, and then the Song Hui Dian, and then the Yuan, okay, Yuan, this is Yuan Dynasty, okay? I'm not very good in shooting, so I'm going to use my finger. Okay, this is Yuan, okay, and then this is Tang, and then it's the Ming Hui Dian, and then Qing Hui Dian. We are now in the Qing Hui Dian, okay? We are now in Qing Dynasty. And over the span of 267 years of the Qing Dynasty, the Qing Hui Dian, okay, or rather the Qing comprehensive reference was compiled 5 times, okay, because things change, okay, they have to update the records. So, and of course, again, we talk about not only the importance of figuring out whether the title is important, but also the print version, is that a reliable version? This is a very reliable version because it's produced by the People's Republic of China. So I'm using a People's Republic of China reprint of a classic that follows, again, more than 1,000 years of tradition in terms of documenting government position and government sort of data. So over here, this would be the Yongzheng, okay? This would be Yongzheng, 1727, okay? And out of the, literally, there are tens of thousands of pages, okay? In page 2095, that's where they talk about the territory of China, and this is the map of China. Of course, actually, you see, please don't misunderstand and think that I'm only talking about maps. The only reason I'm talking about maps is because we have time to talk about that, but that actually contains thousands of pages of content on the details of these territories. But the map tells all, actually. This is the map of all of China, okay? It's 直方总图. It means, the map for the whole territory. I know it's very small for you, but I want to show you, that this is the way it's now being reprinted by the People's Republic of China. And I'm going to expand that map. And that's what you see over here. Again, this is 1727, but they're still following the tradition of the Ming Dynasty. This is Korea, okay? This is this is Rukyo. This is Vietnam, and Vietnam is shown as An Nan. I think I already explained to you earlier. An Nan means peace to the south part of China, to show how it depends on China. Remember, this is Xingshu Lake. That's the source of the Yellow River. Again, the Tibet position is blank. They don't even bother to label it, okay? You have Mongolia label, you have Korea label, okay? You have Rukyo Island label, you have Vietnam label. This is not even labeled, okay? And certainly, it's, of course, there's nothing shown over here. It's just completely blank. Again, the implication is quite obvious, okay? And that is as late as 1727 in the most authoritative publication produced by the Chinese government at that time in the Qing Dynasty, Tibet was just plain not part of China, okay? Now, the Qing Dynasty begins in 1644, so this is 1727, so you're talking about 83 years. So 83 years into the Qing Dynasty, they still never considered Tibet as part of China, which is one third of the dynastic length of the Qing Dynasty. So combining with what we have shown you last time, what it means is that not only throughout the entire Ming Dynasty period, but even in the first one-third of the Qing Dynasty, the question of whether Tibet was part of China was actually a non-question. It's just totally irrelevant because even the Chinese, couldn't care less about where Tibet was, okay? So that's what you see over here. Now, things changed quite a lot. Some decades later, this is the comprehensive reference of Jiaqing. Remember, just now I said about this was the other one, okay, was Yongzheng. It was a comprehensive reference where Tibet wasn't shown. Right now, this is shown right here. This is Tibet. Back Tibet. In China, we call Tibet, back China and front, back Tibet and front Tibet. There's a front part of Tibet and there's a back part of Tibet, okay? So this is back Tibet, okay? In other words, by 1912, there's this change of heart of the Chinese government. They started claiming that Tibet was part of China. Actually, the turning point was 1792, and that's after General Fukhang An expelled the Nepalese invaders. So just now we're talking about earlier now, by 1812, which is after 1792, you can see that China now claims Tibet to be part of China. Okay, so this is actually the first part of the history where this is claimed, which is quite different from what the PRC claims. The PRC claims that Tibet was part of China since Yuan Dynasty, but actually China doesn't really start claiming it. Now, simply because, just like the analogy that I gave you just now, simply because I claim that you're my slave doesn't prove that you're my slave. So, but finally, right now, China is making a claim. This does not, of course, prove that Tibet was part of China, but it actually gives you a very good example of what kind of evidence we should have in proving at least a prima facie primitive proof that Tibet was part of China. In our case, you should have a map like that, okay? Where the government says, hey, look, I'm going to include Tibet into part of my territorial map. And as I've said, it doesn't exist before 1812. So, as I've just said just now, it illustrates the kind of evidence that should exist had China felt that Tibet was part of China, okay? And then over here, so the preceding maps shows that until 18,000, it never occurred to the Chinese rulers that Tibet could be part of China. On the other hand, having claimed doesn't mean that you have processed, okay? It simply means that you have made a claim. But what is interesting, actually, is that, remember, we talk about the current PRC publication, the 8-volume Historical Atlas of China, the Historical Atlas of China, which is sort of compiled by Tan Qi-xiang. Remember, there was sort of commissioned by Chairman Mao Zedong. It's interesting that when they were showing the Ming map, they never quote the Ming unification record or the Ming comprehensive reference, because remember, the Ming publication didn't show that Tibet was part of China. But in the PRC Historical Atlas, when they get to the Qing Dynasty, then they start citing this. They say, hey, look, we are just following the Qing government comprehensive conference. We show that Tibet was part of China. But remember, the Ming corresponding reference didn't show Tibet as part of China, and they kept quiet about it. Okay? So that's okay. But remember, we said that this map shows that Tibet was part of China, but in the same book, in that same very book, okay? And that is in the Great Qing Comprehensive Reference and the Great Qing Unification Record, where they consistently now show that Tibet is part of China. Let's see the table of content, okay, of this thing, okay? So in the map, they show that Tibet is part of China. How how did they classify the various territories? Now, you have a sheet of that in your package, and I would like to ask you to take it out because that's probably too small for you. So I'm going to get my copy. Does everybody have a copy? Yeah, you should have it over here. No, this one. This one. It looks exactly like that. It's just as easier for you. I've printed this out so that you, because I think many of you would find it difficult to read. Okay? So everybody has a copy of that? Okay. Are there any extra copies for those that do not? Okay, that's fine. So, the map shows that Tibet was part of China, but does the content show that Tibet was part of China, or did they actually clearly claim that Tibet was part of China in the Great Qing Unification Record? Remember, we talked about the Great Ming Unification Record yesterday. Today we're talking about the Great Qing. Okay? Okay, you see that there are altogether 560 scrolls. Okay? 560 scrolls. Okay? And the last few scrolls are about tributary countries. Please note that by the Qing era, they are even more ambitious than the Ming Empire. What they show is that among the tributary countries are England, okay, and then France. Now, if you tell people from England and France that they were tributary countries of China, they probably will find it rather amusing. They probably wouldn't be irritated. They probably would just find it amusing, okay? So, these countries are obviously not part of China. Those that are part of China, please note this term. Again, it's not well known at all because the Chinese tried to hide that in the history books. And that is, they were called Tongbu, okay, governing department, okay. So this would be the Hebei governing department, GD, and then this will be the Shenyang, which is the northeastern part, governing department, and then this is the Jiangsu. We call it today the Jiangsu province. We call it today the Anhui province, the Shanxi province, but at that time it was called the Jiangsu governing department, Anhui governing department. They are all with governing department. Till the last one, okay, the most remote one is Xinjiang governing department. And Xinjiang, they actually divide into two parts, okay, because they have in the Xinjiang governing department. And the first part is the places like Hetian, which is today's Xinjiang, which is what we know as today's Xinjiang. But actually, in that book, in that governmental book published by the Qing Empire, they also have then under the Xinjiang governing department, okay, which is same, as I say, as the Anhui in the same level in terms of its sort of as a subordination with the Chinese Empire. You have the Kazakhstan area, Tashkent, and these Hindustan, which is of course in India. So many of these areas are in today's Pakistan, Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. These were all claimed to be part of the Xinjiang province, and a part of what is called the governing department. Okay, and then after that, there are a whole bunch of these places in Mongolia. Some of them they are in today's Mongolia Republic. And then they're also actually part of the governing department. And then after that, they have some of them that are in today's China, Inner Mongolia. And then in scroll 547, they have Tibet. Tibet is actually the first, if you look at this thing, it's the first region that doesn't have this title of governing department, okay? So actually, if you look at the way it's printed over here, and I hope the screen also shows you that, this is, I have shown this as a gray area, okay? In other words, this is clearly China, okay? Jiangsu, Anhui, Shanxi, Shandong, this is clearly not China. What about the green, what about gray part, okay? And if you look at the gray part, you can see that, well, maybe they're not, okay? So Tibet is maybe in a gray area. But it's actually a little bit more than that. The reason is that I think everybody will agree today, even the Chinese, the PRC would agree that Pakistan, Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, they're not part of China, right? But they actually rank above Tibet. But actually the Chinese officers that are responsible for compiling this are actually very smart. They want to make claims because make the emperors happy. They want the emperors to feel that, okay, I have a great territory. But on the other hand, they also have to be serious. And what's the most serious issue over here? Money. Money is always a very serious issue, okay? In other words, is that you don't want to claim a territory to be yours if you cannot collect tax, because remember, the local official will have to then submit those taxes to the capital city. So if you claim that you have power over a certain area, but you collect tax, but you boast about your power, the emperor is going to say, well, where's the money, right? I mean, that's as simple as that. So actually, when they rank them, you can see that, okay? And we'll actually talk a lot more about census. Remember, you say the first two criteria of sovereignty is that you need to count the people, get the tax rolls, and then you start collecting money, okay? So that is census and tax. And you can see the consistency over here. Yes, these areas, there's the book. This is a book, remember, with thousands of pages. Does that book also contain taxation information and census information? Yes, 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 yes. And then it's all no's, okay? There's actually, the real China actually stops about here. And this is actually half of Xinjiang, because again, as I said, during the Qing Dynasty, they claim the Xinjiang includes the Xinjiang area, which actually to them it's a Muslim area. It's not that they conquered all these Muslims, including the Muslims in Pakistan and Afghanistan and so forth. That's what they claim, okay? But then even after they claim that way, but they also arrange them in such a way that those places where they pay tax is ranked in front, so it's yes. And then those places where they don't get to collect tax, where they don't get to count the census, it's in this area, okay? But they're still governing department, and then after that is Tibet. You can see the consistency, not only in the, you see this is the line over that I draw, okay? I mean, this theoretically, the PRC and the Qing Empire would claim that this is China, okay? This whole place is China. But actually, if you look carefully in these two columns, you see that the line actually is here. Because everything below that, they don't have census, they don't have taxation, but there's something else also, okay? If you look at what is called the tributary routes, I think I've mentioned that yesterday. The PRC claims that a sign of sovereignty is that we impose these tributary routes on these foreign countries which are made to submit tributes to us. Well, actually, it's the other way around, okay? Because if a country has to conform to a certain route to go to the capital city, it means they're foreigners. Because if they are internal people, they need, internal people can travel around the country at any time they want. And so that's, you can see there are actually no routes for the internal. And then over here, they start having the yes, okay, and yes. And then over here, please look at the tributary countries. Again, it's yes, including England, okay? They have tributary routes, okay? And that's yes. Now, some of the foreign countries, they have no. The reason why they have no is very different from the no over here. Over here, the reason why there are no tributary routes specified is because they are internal people. They can walk any way they like. These are foreign countries. These are foreign countries that do not submit tributes. Okay, they only traded with China. So if you don't submit tribute, but you're a foreign country, you don't have routes. But if you are a foreign country and then you submit tributes, okay, simply means they have envoys. Okay, then that's yes over here. So England is one of the countries with routes. So if you look at this table, then it becomes actually quite obvious that the Qing Empire recognizes that Tibet, just like Afghanistan and Pakistan, they were not really part of China, but they're just there, for bragging. That's what it is. So anyway, any question on this? Because this map, this table is a little bit complicated. So maybe I should pause for a while to make sure that you understand this table. Yes, ma'am. What?
The Qing were not, what were
they? They were Manchurians, yeah. But again, that's a very complicated question, okay? The PRC will get very mad if you ask that question because the PRC is that we're all Chinese, okay? The PRC version is that we are this big Chinese race consisting of the Hans, the Manchurians, the Mongolians, the Uyghur people in Xinjiang, and certainly, of course, the Tibetans, okay? and that is the PRC's view. Okay, so the PRC's view is that the Qing Empire is part of the Chinese Empire, the tradition of the Chinese. If you get into that argument, it will be another 4 days. So right now, let us temporarily accept the mainstream view of the Chinese meaning the people who live in today's People's Republic of China, whoever they are, and they tend to accept that the Qing Empire is one of the Chinese dynasties without getting into the debate. And in a way, it's not unreasonable to believe it that way because, as I say, if you look at the historical records and you look at many of these laws and things like that, they do follow the Chinese tradition. In fact, Qing law is just practically like a 99% copy of the Ming Dynasty laws. So they follow the language, they follow the laws and whatever.
Ming Dynasty, were they hanged people?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Qing Dynasty was Manchurian.
Right. But now, as I've said, actually today, even if you ask the Manchurians in China, I think 99% of them, I don't have the records. Nobody has, nobody conducted vote in China, remember? But I think it's generally recognized that even if you ask the Manchurians today, they will all recognize themselves as Chinese. As opposed to the Tibetans, okay, the Tibetans say they're not Chinese, the Manchurians are much nicer. Sorry, I'm just joking. The Manchurians are more well, it's not that they're docile. I mean, they recognize the fact that they had their chance, okay? They ruled China for 267 years, and right now the Hans are ruling, but then they say, hey, I mean.
But Sun Yat-sen called them Tatars.
Sun Yat-sen, when he started the revolution, his slogan actually was to kick out the foreigners, meaning the Manchurians. And then after they finished kicking them out, then they said, no, you're not foreign anymore, because Sun Yat-sen and his associates suddenly realized after kicking out these foreigners that if you brand them foreigners, you lose half of China. So all these foreigners became part of China, the Mongolians and then the Tibetans and then the Manchurians. Okay, because if you limit China to just a Han, you will lose Mongolia, you will lose Xinjiang, you will lose Tibet, you will lose Manchuria, and so.
But your chart shows that Mongolia was not part of China.
No. I'm not showing you what I say. I'm giving you, this is what the table of content of this Qing document say. The Qing document shows you this. And this in China is the footnote is at the back. If you turn over the footnotes at the back, okay? Because if you look at that page, this is 1516, and that is to page 556. And then the last row over here is shown in the back page. Turn the back page, because the page isn't big enough to account with the whole, okay? And then the footnotes, and to explain what this thing is, over here I'm just indicating what are the areas that are obviously inside China by today's standard, and what are generally recognized as not within China. So this, I think everybody agrees, is in China. This, everybody agrees, is outside China today. In other words, these areas today are outside China, but then according to this Qing government document, they claim that it's inside China. It's part of the governing department of Xinjiang. So this is what they claim. This is for helping you. I'm giving you the notes over here. I'm saying, hey, this part is generally considered as outside China. This part, again, is generally considered as outside China because today is in the Mongolian Republic. Okay, so it's outside China. Okay, and that is outside China. And then this is the one that, of course, we are discussing. Tibet, is it in or out? Okay.
Sir, if they were paying tributes to the Chinese emperor,
Pardon?
then they are part of China.
I'm sorry. Say that once more, please.
Your chart shows that they were paying tributes, tributary routes. So if they were paying tributes to the Chinese emperor, then they were part of China.
Well, remember we talk about the way tributes are actually paid in the Ming Dynasty by the Tibetans. The way they paid tributes is to get $150,000 from the Chinese government, and they drove the Chinese government near bankruptcy. So, I think what I'm trying to say is that no, actually, even these countries, England was paying tribute. So is England part of China? Okay. No, the PRC, no. Actually, PLC would not want people to remind them that England was also listed as a tributary country. Okay, like here. Okay, England is a tributary country. Actually, later on, we're going to show that Italy was also shown as a tributary country. So I would actually very bluntly tell that I disagree with the PLC, and that is simply being called a tributary country doesn't mean it was part of China. Otherwise, China today could unify England and France and Italy. And certainly Pakistan too. I think some of these areas are in India, actually.
So my question is, today in this, what the Qing Dynasty mentioned? What the Qing Dynasty mentioned is Ceylon is mentioned, and then down the Brunei and Burma, all these are mentioned.
No?
India is not mentioned. Nepal is not mentioned. Do we have any
Oh,
idea?
Nepal is somewhere over here. It's just that etc. You know, it's a long list.
Okay.
It's a long list because so this is etc. etc.
So in the etc., India also goes in. Nepal goes in.
No, actually, I think India is probably over here. India. The Indians are just naughty, okay? They never submit tributary. Okay, so no, I think India is always considered as just one of the countries where they had relationship, but I don't think it was ever listed as a tributary, not by the Ming government, not by the Qing government.
Hindustan it is written.
Yeah, Hindustan was not a tributary. It was part of the governing department. It was part of a governing department, Hindustan, and then Tashkent, and then say Afghanistan. They were part of the Xinjiang governing department. I think that's my whole point. I'm saying is that if you follow this, they're going to say, my goodness, maybe you people are part of China too. Okay? And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just telling you that is what the Chinese official document says. And all I'm saying is that perhaps you people are even more Chinese than Tibetans because the Tibet is ranked here and the Hindustan is here. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just showing you the records over here. That's all. Yes, sir.
Professor Lau, with your permission, can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
See, it's also for the audience because what Professor Lau has explained is quite simple because we have a mental frame of China. And mentally, excuse Inner Mongolia, Tibet, Xinjiang, and Qinghai. Qinghai was, of course, Tibet. And if you remove all these geographical parts, the China we know loses 60% of its territory. So the China which, if you remove the 60%, the China is then technically only just south of the Great Wall and slightly beyond the Yangtze River. It ends there. So that is what, sometimes we've got to think sometimes even beyond the maps that China that way, is it an artificial construct? What is being done there? Is it a construct which has been done through force? Yes. Who are the communities or nationalities who are not willing to be part of it? You know the answer. The answer sometimes is embedded in the question itself. It's all yours, sir.
Yeah.
What about Russia? Russian territories?
We'll actually talk about later on. Russia was again officially branded as one of the Wi-Fi in the same category as Tibet. I'll show you the citations and the quotations afterwards.
Can we see what is the word used in Chinese for Hindustan?
Xindustan, yeah. Xindustan.
Shintustan.
Yeah. Yeah, and also, but no, in that map is Hendu is okay. Do you know Chinese? Okay, 横伤痕的横，很痒，那个痕迹的痕，一个像广东那个，然后就是病痛的病 ，okay, illness 病 ，okay, that thing, and then inside is the yin. Okay, okay, I'll write it for you. 横都斯坦。No. Okay.
What's the Chinese name for it?
横上横的横。Yeah. Okay. Okay. Now again, please note, this is yours, right?
No,
This is mine. Okay. I don't know where I got this. Well, okay. Please again these Chinese names do not correspond to what you understand. So Hindustan is not India. Okay? I have already shown you last time when we were talking about Tibetan terms is that they have places like Wusizhang, they have all these places. They don't even know where Wusizhang is. Okay? So the Hindustan is actually just a term that they are not quite sure where they are. They just listed there, okay, to brag about it. Okay? Because again, you can see no money involved. Money involved. Anything over here, they have to be very careful in making sure that they list it correctly. Anything below that, you know, they can claim anything they like. Nobody cares. Okay?
But tribute was paid.
What?
Tribute was paid. Yes, yes. Tributary routes.
I'm sorry, which one?
Tribute was paid.
No, again, what do you mean by tributes? That's exactly my point. In the Ming Dynasty, what happened to the Tibetan monks was that they brought some cheap gifts. Sorry, but really that's what happened. They brought some cheap gifts from Tibet, okay, and then give it to emperor and kowtow, okay, and then they get 150,000 US dollars. Yeah, they paid tributes, yeah. They brought in tributes that are worth $10, okay, and they wanted the $150,000 back. But, I mean, then it's up to you to interpret. The PRC says that still counts as subordination. The fact that you come all the way to Peking and kowtow to me 3 times, okay, and give me $10 simply means an expression of subordination. That, I don't think I want to get into that because all I'm doing is to produce these records given in the Chinese government, and then it's the interpretation is up to each individual. Okay? Personally, I don't think that is an indication of subordination. I think it's extortion. I think it's a scam. But anyway, okay, I know this is complicated, and I really don't think that I have the ability to explain everything within half an hour, Okay, certainly I don't want to spend half an hour on this. I have only five minutes allocated to this. But I'm just encouraging people who are interested in this topic to go into books like that and be aware of the existence of books like that and go into these books and then really study them. You know, this book has thousands of pages, and I can't really condense it into one page, which I'm trying to. Okay, so but anyway, let me move on maybe and look at something else. So I have shown just now a very authoritative publication by the government, okay, which are the comprehensive references. Now I'm trying to show you one that is not by the government, but it is by a scholar, okay? And this is called Contemporary and Historical Geography. Again, why is this book great? I mean, why should you even care what this book says, okay? This book is republished again by the People's Republic of China, and it's included what is called the 四库未收书集刊. And so this one is included in this thing, okay? 四库未收书集刊, okay? Collection of works missed by 四库全书, CWMSK. So what's so great about CWMSK? What's so grand about it? Well, this follows the categorized list of books missed by 四库全书. It was compiled in 1920 by 30-plus China's leading grandmasters of Chinese studies. The list identifies almost all the contemporaneously extant, outstanding works that are either missed by the editors of Qianlong's 四库全书 or appeared after those years before the end of the Qing Dynasty. The list is recognized as highly authoritative in the field of bibliography and cataloging. The photocopy images of the works are now published by the Beijing press. This, again, comes from Baidu. Remember, so this is the PRC's version of the whole thing. In other words, this book is recognized both by the Republic of China in the 1920s. Okay, they identified this book as one of the important books in the list, and then it's now republished by the PRC. So it's a book that's acclaimed by a panel of top Republic of China scholars, republished by the PRC. Okay, so it's one of the most. In fact, on top of that, this book can be downloaded for free. The whole book can be downloaded for free from the Harvard Library website. So the Americans think it's an important book too. Okay, so this particular book is the only Chinese geography book. The list has 2,000 titles. That the list of books that are missed by Siku Chensu, which is compiled, remember, which was compiled in 1920. There are 2,000 titles, but among those, a Chinese geography book, there's only one. So that shows you how sort of outstanding or important this book was during the Qing Dynasty. Okay, it was completed sometime in the 18th century, in the Jia-Qing period, and then in 1997 it was republished. And then this second edition was published by actually the grandson of the author, in 1877, okay? So please note these two dates, okay? And it was published sometimes at the end of the 18th century, okay? And about 100 years later, less than 100 years later, in 1877, it was republished. In 1877, please remember, that is after the Opium War, when China, was, of course, was defeated by England. The end of the Opium War was the Opium War was 1842. So please remember the dates for reference, okay? So in other words, this book was republished after the Second World War. The first edition was published before the Opium War, but then it was then republished after the Opium War, and then it was now reprinted by the PRC in 1997. So let's see what this book says. This is the table of content, and you can see the scrolls. The first three scrolls are Beijing, and then Shenyang, okay? Shengjing, I'm sorry, Shengjing, which is the Manchurian capital. And then Zili means the Hebei province, and these are all the provinces, okay? And again, there's no Tibet, okay? And then at the end, there's a chapter or a scroll on various tributary countries. So the first point I want you to look at is that there's no Tibet over here, okay? But what's more interesting is that you look at the various tributary countries. I'm going to show you, for those of you who know Chinese, this is the verification. This is Jinggu Di Li Shu, okay? Zili Sheng, that's Hebei, province Hebei, blah, 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 and so forth. And then the last one is Chao Gong Ge Guo, tributary countries, okay? Let's look at what those tributary countries are. Tibet is not, remember, please look at that, particularly if you know Chinese, Tibet is not listed as one of those. Remember, this book was republished in 1877, and it was again reprinted by the PRC quite recently. Okay, for those of you who can read Chinese, I'm going to read it for you, and then I want you to explain it to me. 西洋诸国朝贡，其通贡者曰波尔都加利亚国，曰意大利亚国，曰波尔都噶尔国，曰英吉利国。贡道 means tributary from Canton, or province of Canton, or Guangdong. Sorry, press the wrong one. Okay, we have Chinese experts over here. I'm sure you realize that 英吉利国 means England, right? That's pretty obvious, okay? 意大利亚国 means Italy, right? What is 波尔都加利亚国? 西洋诸国, the Western nations. Anybody knows that? Those? Yeah? Very good. Portugal. What about this one? Look at that. There's another one. There's a 波尔都加利亚国. That's a 波尔都噶尔国. What is the other one? It's the same country as Portugal. Portugal is counted twice, okay? They just translate slightly different way because it's just submitted, okay, to the Chinese and to the Chinese emperor so that everybody can be happy. Say, oh, look at all these countries are submitting tributes to us, okay? So these are tributary countries, okay? Portugal is counted twice, and then you have England, and then you have, Italy, okay? And then, of course, later on, Tibet shows up, okay? Seats are over here, okay? In other words, actually, if you look at in English, that's what it is. Is that, remember in the tables of content, there was no Tibet, but the last chapter was a whole bunch, a list of tributary countries, and the tributary countries, the first tributary countries listed was Korea, and then after that it was Russia, that was Vietnam, and then over here, they have Holland over here, and then after Holland, they have Burma, after that they have countries in Western Ocean, and we have just seen that page with the with the names, the countries in Western Ocean, namely are Portugal, Italy, England, okay? And then after that, you have poor Tibet over here, okay, which is the last one, okay? And this was published, as I said, after the Opium War. They still actually claim that England was a tributary country, and then, of course, so was Tibet. Okay? So again, what does it mean? You can, of course, make the interpretation yourself. So anyway, again, I can't go through all these books, but I have in the book that will be coming out next week in Chinese. Okay, actually, I've gone through. These are undoubtedly the most authoritative books on geography during the Qing Dynasty. We have only looked at this one, okay, Jiaqing, and then this one, and then we have then looked at this one, okay. But then if you look at the others, you can see that if you look at the Qing Dynasty authoritative geographic texts, you would see that they show very clearly that Tibet was really not part of China, except for these question mark ones. They are ambiguous. And we have just looked at this one, for example. This one is ambiguous because the reason why I say this one is ambiguous is that the map shows that Tibet was part of China. But if you look at the table that we went through, okay, it shows that Tibet wasn't really part of China. It's actually below Hindustan and below Kazakhstan and so forth. So we put a question mark. It doesn't say yes, it doesn't say no. So we have 4 that are sort of questionable and the others that are no. Okay? But that is enough for us to justify going further because you do have a semi-legitimate claim that, hey, you know, at least some of these documents indicate that Tibet was part of China. So we are going to go into now, for Qing Dynasty, it's now necessary for us to talk about the other criteria, right? Because in the Ming Dynasty, it was so obvious. Now it's not obvious anymore, okay? Did the Qing government have any legitimate claim? So let's look at the Census and Residency Registry. Was the Qing government ever able to conduct census in Tibet? Were Tibetans considered as Chinese or Chinese citizens or Chinese nationals? Or at that time, there was no such thing as citizenship, but were Tibetans considered as subjects of the Qing emperor? Because in a lot of countries, there's no such thing as citizenship, but you were subjects of the ruling emperor, whatever as the case may be. Okay? So let me go through very briefly the census records of China. This is my conclusion. I haven't proven yet, but I'm giving a conclusion. The Qing Empire officially considered Tibetans as non-Chinese, okay? And has never been able to conduct census in Tibet. And how do we know that? Well, first of all, again, there are standard records carrying all the census records. For example, in the early part of the Qing Dynasty, it is reported in the imperially approved Comprehensive Research of Imperial Dynasties Records. Of course, this is just translation, okay? The Chinese is, of course, equal to this. And again, I want to stress that these books, okay, can actually be obtained from websites such as archive.org for free. You can go and check those things, okay? Provided you know enough Chinese, okay? So it gives the population figures for every province or empire for the following years. And this is in the early part of the Qing Dynasty, during the Kangxi Emperor period, during the Yongzheng Emperor, during the Qianlong Emperor, and for all these years, you see, for every 5 or 6 years, you'll conduct a census. And so what you have is that you have, for example, for Qianlong year 48, 1783, they will then tell you that the total population is so much, okay? And then they have this province is so much. You see, it's down to the last digit, okay? So, and then they will have all the other provinces, same format, same format. And again, Tibet is never included in any of those years, okay? Now, by the way, this list also does not include Mongolia. But it's then, if you go to the book will tell that for Mongolian population figures, they will say, well, go to scroll 20, Census Research 2, where they have the census for 8 banners. The 8 banners are the Banner Hans, the Banner Mongolians, and then the Banner Manchurians and so forth, okay? That's where they are basically the privileged Chinese, okay? And then, but neither of these 2 scrolls contain a word about Tibet, okay? Now, what we have just shown are records for the early part of Qing Dynasty, but actually, because that book was published in the early part of the Qing Dynasty. Okay? What about the latter part? The latter part, again, you can go back to this comprehensive reference. We have already talked about the comprehensive reference just now. Remember the map, okay, and everything? That's a Huidian, right? And again, I already mentioned that the Huidian, the Great Qing Comprehensive Reference, was compiled and revised 5 times. Okay? So each one of those, they would carry the population figures for the period that they cover. Each book would cover about 50 to 70 years. So in the Guangxi, which is the last comprehensive reference, then you go to these pages, and then they will tell you this. Ministry of Interior, duties of the ministers, manage the residency registry of the world sea. This is the Chinese word. In Chinese, it's called Tianxia. Tianxia literally, of course, means what's under heaven, okay? But to Chinese, it means that what's relevant to us, which is basically China, because everything else is irrelevant, of course. Then the population registers of the external fund, and that's to answer, again, the question just now, okay? They actually sometimes they even call Russia wide fund, but over here, they're a little bit more circumspect. What they mean over here, the wide fund will be Mongolia, and Mongolia is managed by the Li Fan Yuan, which is Fan Office again. No mention of Tibet. So the wide Fan Yuan would then, of course, carry the Mongolian population. But, okay, this is a much more important concept, which again, very unfortunately, is the PLC doesn't teach that in high school history, and that is actually in China, we have 2 kinds of Chinese. We have internal Fu Ming, okay, internal people. Fu literally means this thing over here, okay? So that's internal people. They are counted by individual persons. And then they are the real Chinese provinces like Shandong and Jiangsu and whatever. And then they have border people, Bianming, okay? So French people, they are counted by households, okay? And then among the Bianming, okay, among the Bianming will be the Tibet 39 tribe. And these are the ethnic rulers, and there are 4,889 households. Now, it's very clear in the Chinese books that Tibet's 39 tribe does not belong to Tibet. It's actually sort of in the boundary area between Qinghai and Tibet and Sichuan, okay? And you can see that there are only 4,889 households, so obviously it's not really the real Tibet. And then, of course, they even include places like this place, okay, in today's Tuva Republic, Ming tributary tribe, 768 households. Okay, these are all included. Okay, so they have 2 kinds of people, and but the Tibetans were never counted as either the core people, the internal people, nor the border people. Okay? Now, you have this also, and that's on the reverse page. If you could look at that, that is to further prove that China was never able to get any population records or even population figures from Tibet. Okay? So we have already looked at this one. Remember? The Great Qing Comprehensive Record, Jiaqing. And then you can see that, for example, for Shandong province, for a regular province of China, then you can see that through the years, they have kept population figures. So these are the publication date of these authoritative publications. And then you can see, well, the population figures, of course, they increase through the years, okay, which is natural. Yeah? And for this one, which is now in the Tuva Republic of Russia, again, you can see that they kept figures even for a very small tribe. This one in the Jiaqing Comprehensive Record is 595, and then 768. In the Qing History Draft, no figure is given, but then there's a statement explicitly stating that by that time, this place has been taken over by Russia, therefore we have no records. In other words, they do mention that we don't provide any figures right now because it's no more part of China. Now, in contrast, Tibet 39 tribe, the 4889 remains constant. Okay, I'll go into that a little bit detail. Basically, what happened was that for some reason, they got this figure, okay, about these people, and they were never able to update it. They were actually able to update the figure of this tribe, a very small tribe, okay, in Russia, but for these, they were not able to update it, but they still put it inside their books because they just still want to claim that it's part of China, so they have the figures, okay? But again, please note that even for the fringe people, like the Tibet 39 tribes, please note that they don't put it in the geography section, they put it in the military section. That is to indicate that the authors of the Qing history draft, they were trying to be honest. In other words, they have pressure from the government to sort of pretend as if this is part of China, okay? But you see that they don't even have the right figures. So they consciously, in good conscience, realize that they cannot be put into geography because remember the 2,500-year tradition is to put the census figures and the taxation figures in the geography section. But then for this, they don't put it in the geography section, they put it in the military section just to sort of, as a compromise. But this, remember, is not for Tibet. That's even for an area that is in the border area of Tibet and Sichuan, you have this kind of a problem. Then, of course, what about Tibet? Well, there's just no Tibet. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Okay? Okay. So that's the review over here. We have inner people and then border people, and these are all subjects of the Qing emperor. And the people in Tibetan areas controlled by the Kashaka and Panchen Lama, which corresponds to the Tibetan autonomous region of today, was neither shown as inner people or border people. It's just plain not Chinese. I mean, some people take it as an insult. I think the Tibetans will probably take it as a compliment. But your objection would be, well, there are figures, you just didn't find it. Okay, and again, as I said, it's very difficult for me to prove that something doesn't exist, right? I'm not claiming that they don't have the figures, and you can always claim that, well, they have the figures, okay? You just haven't found it, okay? Now, okay, there are two ways to defend myself. One is to say that, well, yeah, if you think that there exists, then why don't you show it to me? And the PRC government has never actually shown the figures, okay? So if they have the figures, they can show it. But there's actually a better way to prove that, okay? A more conclusive way to prove it is that the PRC's figures actually was just that, pardon me for saying this, the fabrication was just so ridiculous that it helps me to prove that these figures do not exist. And how do I prove it? That would be what I'm going to talk about, okay? Tibet population figures are actually given. They are actually given in China's authoritative Tibet references, okay? But that's how it's given. So the oldest one is actually in a book that's called Tibet Record. It has been republished many times, okay? In the PRC edition, it recognizes as anonymous. And it's not generally recognized that this book is anonymous, and also the publication date is also unclear. Okay, we don't know who wrote it, we don't know when it was published, it was just old manuscript, and there's this passage. Of course, this is a translation. The passage says, in 1737, compiled and submitted to Li Fanyuan for inclusion in unification record, blah, 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 and then there are altogether common people, 121438 households, 302 lamas, the Panchen Lama rules over blah, 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 okay? So this is the sort of the data that is shown in the Chinese classical book. So I would like you to look at this table because the argument is a little bit difficult to follow, it's a little bit complicated. So I would like you to look at this, the second table over there. The second table, this one. In the line that says Tibet Record, in the line that says Tibet Record, the line, the year of completion is 1750. Do you see those figures? People is 121,438, and then the lamas is 302,560. Do you see that in the first row? Okay, and then similarly across the Panchen Lama, you see those figures in the first row? Everybody sees that, the table? Can you see that? Do you have extra copies for some of you who do not have the table? Okay, would you like to have a copy of the table? Okay, that's okay. Okay, fine. So, So this is the sort of the oldest record of Tibet population figures in a Chinese publication. Please remember that in this Chinese publication, we don't know the publication date. We also don't know the name of the author. Okay?
But the figures are constant.
What? That's my point. That is my point. But I haven't got to that yet. You have stolen my thunder, so to speak. Yes, that's actually what I'm trying to prove. You're absolutely right. Okay? You are absolutely right. That's the problem. So, okay. So this is the first row. I have summarized it, and this was the figure in a publication that's supposedly around 1750. Let's look at the second authoritative publication, Chinese publication. And that one is by, again, this is a very prestigious book. You can, go into Duxiu and then look it up, Sheng Wu Ji, okay? And the PLC will just tell that this is a very patriotic book by a very patriotic author, okay? They defend, the integrity of Chinese territory, blah, 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 and so forth, okay? And so according to this thing, it says, governed by the Lama, again, so many Lamas and so many common people, governed by Panton, blah, blah, blah. And you look at those numbers, you can please verify that that is in the second row of the table, where it says over here, record of holy conquest, and then those are the figures. And as this gentleman has already sort of preceded my objective, you can see that they're basically the same. Right? Okay. And now if we look at the third one, which is, of course, the official history of China, okay? And that is the Qing history draft. And then that is not included in the geography section. Remember, I keep reminding you, okay, we follow traditional formats. Population figures should be placed in the geography section. But again, the authors over here, they have enough conscience to know that, hey, there's something wrong over here. They're embarrassed about this whole thing, but they still have to include it. So they put it in the Fan region section, okay, which is 525, which is towards the end of the book. And then if you look at those figures, you can see that, well, again, basically they're the same. Yes, sir?
Professor, in the figures, 1,21,438 is Tibet record of holy conquests, and Qing history draft.
Yeah.
Biographies of Dalai Lamas, again 1,21,438, but they are mentioned as serfs.
Yeah, you haven't gotten to that yet. That's a funny part too. Yeah, but I haven't gotten to that. Well, that's it. One row at a time, okay? One row, yeah. So we are down to, again, you're trying to steal my thunder, okay? So later on you see, hey, something wrong, how come the serfs, okay? But right now, we unfortunately, we're still at the third row, Qing history draft, right? So as this gentleman, as he pointed out, wait a minute. That would mean that over the 200 years, you have basically the same set of figures. And the same set of figures come from a book with an unknown author, with an unknown publication date, okay? So that actually proves very much that you really don't have any reliable figures. I don't know where the heck you get a figure from an anonymous book, and then you use it for 200 years. As compared to just now what I showed you about all the other Chinese areas where they update the figures every 5 years or 6 years, even for a tribe, with 500 people up in Russia, okay, they update it. For this one, that's all they have.
See, it's 1963. So the term.
No, I haven't come to that yet.
Yes.
Okay, again, please limit yourself to the first 3 rows. The fourth row, I haven't reached that part yet. Do you have any question about the first 3 rows? Yes.
You have mentioned area governed by Dalai Lama.
Yeah.
And other is governed by Panchen Lama.
Yeah.
So Dalai Lama area would be around Lhasa.
Yeah.
And Panchen Lama around Shigatse.
Yeah.
So these two were independent to each other?
I don't know. That's what the author is saying. I'm just showing you the records. It's frankly, I think the whole bunch of it is probably made up because I don't know where they get the records from, okay? But what I'm showing is that these records are reused even by the official history of China, which is the Qing history record, and that's used. I'm just showing you the records. I'm not trying to defend it. There's no reason why I would defend it, and I don't want to defend it. I don't know where they got it from. And you are right, okay? You can question about the separation. Why do you have separate figures? I don't know enough, but I don't think it's honestly, I don't think it's unreasonable. But we have Tibetans over here, okay? They might be a lot more qualified. To my understanding is that that's not an unreasonable petitioning, because I think in what's today's TAR, there was a part where the Panchen Lama is more powerful, and there's another part where the Dalai Lama was more powerful. So to me, it didn't look unreasonable, okay? But I don't want to defend it, okay? I'm just showing you those are the figures that the Chinese government, they have been using over 200 years. It's from a source that you have identified another questionable characteristic, okay? And again, I don't disagree with you. I also don't necessarily agree with you. All I'm saying is it's none of my business. It's not what I'm trying to
I
get.
just was interested to know if there was any gender composition available at that time.
General what?
Gender composition of the...
Gender, no. No. For all of China, yes. Not for Tibet. Yeah, because if you look at the figures, okay, for the Shanxi province and whatever, yes, they will tell you. Actually, they will tell you total individuals, how many, and how many of them are women, how many of them are men, and then they also tell the household. There will be two separate figures. Individuals and households. Remember, for the border people, for the Bianming, only households. But for the Fuming, okay, the internal, the tummy people, okay, they have both the household people and the individuals, and then they then have men and women. Yes, they do. But for this, that's what they have. That's what they have. Okay, I'm just showing what they have. Okay, again. So I think this actually proves that the Chinese didn't have any reliable, credible source for the population figures. I think, again, subjectively, I think what happened was this. I think what happened was the author over here, anonymous, probably a Qing officer stationed in Tibet, and he probably got this information through unofficial means from the Tibetan government, okay, or some government officers, and so he wrote it down without revealing the true source. Now, actually, the book does claim that it was compiled and submitted to the Qing Empire Li Fan Yuan for inclusion into the unification record, okay? So there is a source, except that it's now well recognized that it is incorrect because you go to the Qing unification record and there is no figure for Tibet. Okay, so this statement is definitely wrong. But the PLC capitalizes it by saying, there you see, the Tibetan government had to submit. But wait a minute, you can see this is very tricky. You know, the author says this was compiled and submitted to the Li Fan Yuan. Who submitted it? It didn't say the Tibetan government submitted it, okay? It could be just a Qing official. Well, and there's no dispute the fact that the Qing Empire had people stationed in Tibet, okay? So compiled and submitted to Li Fan Yuan doesn't really mean that it was done by the Tibetan government, but what's more important is that it actually was never included in the unification record to begin with. Okay, any question? Now to answer your question. Before I go to that, again, I'm not defending anything, I'm just showing you records, okay? But as a background, I think all of you know that one of the major justifications of the liberation of Tibet by the PLC is to liberate the serfs, right? I'm sure you've all heard of that, okay? Okay, we all taught, particularly Chinese are taught that, you know, there are all these serfs, they're exploited by the Dalai Lama and his clique, and then there are just all these serfs, okay? How do you know that there are all these serfs, and there are many of these serfs, okay? That is actually only one evidence that the PLC has produced that involves numbers. Because when you say many, are you talking about 2% or 98%? Okay, so this figure, okay, I don't know, those of you who can read Chinese, do you know who Ya Hanzhang is? Okay, it's the premier, it's a forefront Tibetan scholar of the PLC, okay? And this book, Biographies of Dalai Lama, was actually written as an internal publication for the education of the national officers, okay, the cadres of China. Okay, it was an internal publication, and it was considered as so authoritative that Premier Zhou Enlai personally ordered that it be published to the public. And then after that, it was translated into Tibetan, Mongolian, English, and German. Okay, and it's widely cited not only in China but throughout the world by the Westerners. Okay, because it was published, in English and German. Okay, so this is the most authoritative, sort of a recent publication, and they have this figures over here on the serfs, and this is the only pre-1949 numerical evidence that the PRC can produce. And that is now to answer your question. It says, according to what is reported in the record of Holy Conquest, and that's the reason why in this handout I've already shown you the slide earlier, okay? The slide of the record of Holy Conquest was shown earlier, but right now that passage is given as extract 2. Okay? I'm reproducing it, okay, so that you can check. So in the biographies of Dalai Lamas, this Yahan Zhang, which is again, as I say, the topmost expert in Tibet affairs, claims that in the record of Holy Conquest about the figures submitted in 1733 by the 5th Dalai Lama. I'm going to embarrass some of the Tibetans over here. Do you know when did the Dalai Lama of the 5th die? That's an unfair question. This is the first 25. I mean, this whole passage is just so ridiculously funny that I don't know how this could sort of come about. I mean, if you look at, I couldn't find another word for it, is that of all the lies that are told by the PRC, this lie is about the funniest of that I've seen. First of all, the Dalai Lama died before this, okay? So it's no, you can go to the figures and see that the Dalai Lama was no more in 1733, okay? There's no way the Dalai Lama could have submitted it. And first of all, if you look at, because he quotes the record of conquest, if you look at the record of conquest, the record of conquest never claimed that it was submitted by the 5th Dalai Lama, and certainly not in year 1733. And then at that time, there were these main lamas belonged to the Dalai side and belonged to the Panchen side. So these two figures, as you can see, they do correspond. You look at this table once more. You look at this table. Look at this table, okay? And those numbers do correspond to that. Okay? And then, but then the author went on and said, the total number of serfs belonging to the monasteries were 128,190 households. Among them, those serfs that belonged to Panchen side with so many households. And you can see that if you take this figure minus this figure, okay, then you get the serfs on a 121438. And so if you look at this 121438, you look at this 6752, again, it's exactly the same as that. And that's the answer to your question. Yahan Zhang just called these common people as serfs.
Professor, the year intrigues me because that is 1963. This was much after the Great Leap Forward and just before the Cultural Revolution.
Yeah.
So the term serfs, was it included by some diehard comrade?
No, because they are modern editions, okay? The most recent one, it's being repeatedly cited, okay? In fact, I'll show you something else, okay? It's being repeatedly cited not only in China, but in the Western world. And the word serfs, nongnu, there's no ambiguity. Nongnu can, okay, the Chinese word used by the earlier writings were either 百姓 or 黑人. 黑人 for the Tibetans, actually you call them black people, and of course in Chinese we call it 前手. It's the same actually. Chinese say black hate simply means ordinary people, as opposed to the monks with no hair. Okay, so the black hates, okay, or the black people means the 百姓, okay, and they cannot possibly be interpreted as serfs. Whereas over here it means serfs. Okay, so that's the answer to your question. In other words, a very blunt answer to your question is that somebody obviously lied over here. Okay, and the fact that that lie could have perpetuated and be continued for all these decades, I just think it's amazing.
Professor, it is 5:30 now.
Yeah.
So far, it has been an interactive session.
Okay, could you let me finish just one part over
Yes,
here?
but according
Yeah.
to the schedule, now is the Q&A session.
Yeah, but I want to finish just one point.
Please.
Okay, this is to answer your question about how widely it is. And anyway, because I need to finish that. To arrive at the prevalence of serfdom in Tibet, this book not only comes up with these figures of serfs by simply naming these common people as serfs, and then he came up with this idea that each of those numbers is one serf that represents one household, and then there are 5 persons per household. So you multiply it by 5, and then they come up with 640,000 serfs. Okay, in other words, they convert the people's figure into the serf figure, multiply by 5 by claiming that there are 5 persons per household, and then they get a total figure. And this is widely cited, so this is one example. Okay, so if you look at Tibet Daily News, okay, 2009 page, if you go to Dushu, you search through that, you just, actually all you would do is to type in Chinese, okay, 6752 households of serfs, okay, and there will be, you know, you go to Dushu, the database, you know, there'll be just so many books that they're still being cited to this day, okay? And so this is a common citation, okay? Poor thing. These 640,000 serfs not only had to serve and provide for more than 300,000 lamas without compensation. People like you get all the free service. Sorry, I pressed the wrong one. They also had to shoulder all kinds of taxes and corvée imposed by the Tibet local government. Okay, so anyway, so I can stop over here and ask for questions. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. This is very comprehensive and detailed, and I'm completely confused. One thing is, where the Chinese people migrated from where? In the beginning, and the Indian too. Someone says China came from Africa, and China is a Peking man, and they have migrated to Bering Strait to all Americas, and the white people can butcher them like animal. So all these things, and then before the Ming Dynasty, which dynasty was there and going on? And second,
Yuan Mingqing. Yuan Dynasty preceded Ming Dynasty.
And then the South Asian group, like Nepal, Bhutan, Nagas, and Mizos, up to Singapore. All this region, Mao Zedong said it is Chinese. What is your proof?
No, I don't want to touch on that question because it's way too complicated and it's not the purpose of my talk. Well, we all know that, no, shouldn't we all know that? People like us were told by scientists that we all come from the same ancestor, which is this woman in Africa, Lucy, right? Yeah. So again, you know, I mean, why have different nations, why have different languages, okay? So, I mean, but those things have nothing to do with us. Okay, you look at, for example, you can argue that the Jews and the Arabs, they're all descendants of Abraham, okay? If you know about the biblical tradition, the Western biblical tradition, okay? Why do the Muslims and the Jews, they won't define among themselves? They're all descendants of one person, Abraham. Okay, and we all, then if you're Christians, you believe they're all descendants of Adam and Eve, okay, or Lucy as the case may be. But I don't know how relevant that is to what I'm talking about.
Last question. How do you tell to Xi Jinping and Modi about Tibetan's problem here in India by Dalai Lama?
That's not my research. My research has nothing to do with those things. In fact, I'm not interested in what the Tibetans should do, okay? What I'm trying to show are these records that, in my opinion, would prove to me that Tibet was never part of China. However, you can reach a different conclusion. I've really specifically mentioned yesterday, for example, that after having seen all the Ming Dynasty documents, a perfectly logical conclusion would be that the Ming Emperor and his officers were a whole bunch of separatists that are just as bad as the Dalai Lama, okay? You can conclude that, okay? I just ended up with the conclusion that I think probably these emperors are not that dumb, but you want to think that they're just evil people like Dalai Lama, it's not illogical, okay? So the same thing. Even if you reach my conclusion, and that is my conclusion being that Tibet was never part of China, and therefore the 1950 military action was not a unification. What I believe that it's not a unification, but it's an invasion, and it's really the taking over of another person's country. Does it mean that Tibet today should protest? Not necessarily. I mean, a lot of times when I go out and somebody hit me, I'll just walk away because, if I fight back, I'll probably be killed. Okay, so maybe the smartest thing to do if somebody hits you is just to be coward and walk away. I have nothing to do with this. I'm just showing you the historical records. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Any other question? What should we do now, sir?
What about the aristocracy?
What?
Aristocracy.
Well, actually, that's interesting. That's interesting. Is that you look at those figures?
Aristocracy.
They have only two groups of people. The original records had the lamas and the Baixing, the ordinary people, and Yahan Zhang changed it into the lamas and then the serfs. Okay. What about people like you say that what you call the exploitation class? Okay, and there's no record for that. In other words, those records, they are really very sloppy, and it's an insult to Chinese culture because if you look at China proper, the Chinese government, they would not have such sloppy records. They would have very, very good records. In other words, to try to use those records to reflect sort of Tibetan population, one way to interpret it is that if this is really what China had, it's a very bad reflection on Chinese sort of administrative sophistication, which is what I was trying to show earlier. Remember, I showed you that all these years, okay, every 4 or 5 years, they will have very detailed records, down to the last digit. So yeah, but the short answer is that that's all they have. And that is it. And you can see, so my proof is that they couldn't possibly have better records because Yahan Zhang had to use that same set of records that came out in 1750. And when the Chinese Communist Party, they had to fabricate figures for the serfs, okay, or rather the prevalence of serfdom, again, they have to go back to the same set of figures and then change the name, the term, common people to serfs. To me, that is clear-cut proof that they have no other set of figures. Which is a little bit, I think, a little bit surprising to me. And that is, I would think that if you tell lies, you can tell better lies. But this is a really very, very poorly constructed lie. That's what I'm trying to.
Professor, to confuse you a bit, in Chinese, 0 is called Ling. And 0 was India's contribution to mathematics and geometry.
Yeah.
So should India have claimed a patent on it? Because all software is with ones and zeros.
I don't know why. We are using, H2O, E equals to mc squared. They're all sort of discovered by scientists in the Western world. Okay, a lot of these things are discovered by one group of people, and then they are used throughout the world. That's why human beings have advanced through the ages beyond the animals and the dinosaurs. If the Indians want to claim this what you call credit for 0, China will claim credit for tea leaves, and then for a person like me with an engineering background, my goodness, all the textbooks that I've read, all the names are either German or Anglo-Saxon or whatever, and then so every time we say H2O or whatever.
Patents are for the new invention.
Pardon?
Patents are for the new inventions. Those are quite old.
Yeah. No, but a lot of new things that are invented, so to speak, that are discovered, they are immediately made to be made available to the entire world. That's what we do as professors. That's what we do as professors. We do things for free. Just like the research over here that I'm doing it for free. That's what, I mean, American professors, I don't know about professors in other countries. I mean, American professors are brought up to believe that you do these things, you publish it, and it's for free use without claiming credit for the United States or for your ethnic group. That's my view.
So all these facts and figures that have been shown,
yeah.
I was quite surprised that India is almost missing. Where does India figure in? All those border countries, everything is there. India,
I have excluded India, not purposely, but it's because it's irrelevant to my topic. Actually, if you look at all this list of tributary countries, these are foreign countries, there is, and if you remember, I did show Tibet once. If you remember, it's just simply it's irrelevant to our discussion. Remember, I showed you this one. This is India. India is ranked right behind Tibet. So it's an example where Tibet, but you see, I mean, I'm talking about these records with a listing of hundreds of countries, and I think for my purpose, it's more meaningful to show a tributary country like England rather than a tributary country like India. Because if I show people that China claims India to be a tributary, of course it's not true, but it's not as laughable as showing that China claims that Britain was a tributary country, or for that matter, like the Netherlands. So that's the reason why I've got. Now, if you look at this thing, by the way, if you look at this book, the one that was published in the Qing Dynasty, that was selected by the 四库全书未收书籍, okay? You can see that even they didn't mention India, okay? They mentioned Laos, Siam, and this is the Philippines, Holland, and the countries of the Western Ocean would be Italy, Portugal, but there's no mention of India. It's not my fault. Again, I'm not trying to defend them, but it actually, India was I think my guess is that China had more trade and more interaction with countries like Vietnam, okay, and even the Dutch and the Portuguese than the Indians. You're right.
There was cultural exchange.
I have no explanation, and again, I'm not an expert on that. I have no explanation for that phenomenon. It's just that if you look at most of these books, they will mention Malacca, they will mention Borneo, they will mention Cambodia, and they will mention England, okay? England actually, of course, even before the Opium War, it appeared many times because they sent envoys. I don't think India actually sent envoys. Now that you mention it, I'm not 100% sure, but if you ask me for a split-second reaction, I don't remember actually having read records of. Well, first of all, remember there was no such thing as India at that time. It was divided into many principalities, ruled by the Rajas and Maharajas and so forth, okay? My guess was that none of these Maharajas were really big enough or influential enough to send envoys to China. Because at that time, if you want to send envoys to China from India, you cannot go through Tibet, okay? You have to go around, okay, to, the ocean way, and then.
What is the Western Ocean?
What's that?
Western Ocean. What does it mean? Western Ocean.
That's the name they use, and I'm telling that the Western Ocean, the author eventually describes that as Italy, Portugal, and England.
Is it Atlantic Ocean?
I don't know what the author means. Again, okay. In Chinese, it's called Xi Yang Guo, okay? I'm just directly translating the Chinese manuscript. It says Xi Yang Guo, so I say Western Ocean, okay? Does that Western Ocean mean that Atlantic Ocean or what? I haven't the slightest idea. The reason is this. If they're talking about Portugal, I don't even know whether they're talking about the Portugal in Europe or the Macau in China. I haven't the slightest idea. I think I've explained, this Holland, it definitely doesn't mean the Netherlands in Europe. This Holland, I am 99% sure it refers to what is today Indonesia. Okay?
Who draw the map of the world? We do not concern Chinese or Indian.
I'm sorry, say that once more.
Who draw the world map?
A lot of people drew maps. You know, there are thousands of people through the ages that drew maps of different countries. I can draw a map, okay? Anybody can draw a map. But I have tried to use maps that are printed by the most authoritative bodies, okay? Not any Tom, Dick, and Harry, but anybody can draw a map. If you look at these stores of antiques, they will have all kinds of maps, okay? They're drawn 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago by all kinds of artists, okay? Anybody can draw a map. You buy a piece of paper, you can draw a map. But is it a map published by a reliable source that is authoritative? And I have limited myself to maps that are produced by or commissioned by, for example, the Ming Emperor or the Qing Emperor. That's all. Were they necessarily correct? No, I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that, hey, if you don't believe in the emperor's version of his empire, then what are you going to believe? That's all. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Thank you for the informative talk, Professor.
Yeah?
I wasn't here yesterday, so I don't know if it was discussed already. But I was interested in knowing what has the response been to your research from the Chinese academia or, say, official sources? Because whenever research like this comes out, say, when the UN rejected China's claim of the 9-line, 11-line, they just outrightly reject it. But here you're showing internal inconsistencies which challenge their own official records. So I was just interested.
Well, my book is going to come out next week. I'll see what happens after that. My guess is that actually I've given presentations and I understand that they know about my presentations. They're aware of what, because I have given similar presentations in the past 3 years, okay? Among them, one in Brussels, okay, which is by the organized by the Central Tibetan Administration, and several others, okay, in Taiwan and other parts of Europe, and Oxford University, and so forth. And actually, I'm aware of the fact that they're aware of what I'm doing, okay? They have actually been very quiet. Now, honestly, there are two possible explanations. One is that I'm so insignificant that they don't want to waste your time to address it. They just think that it's just a mad person, you know, just talking rubbish. I would like to believe that there is a second explanation. The second explanation being that if I were in the position, I'd prefer to ignore me. In other words, if somebody presents evidence like that you cannot refute, the best way is to ignore it. And I hope that's the reason. But it could be the other one. It could be that I'm just overestimating myself, and that they just think that I'm crazy. Okay? But my book will come out next week. But unfortunately, the book is published in the Fanti, okay, in the sort of the Taiwan script. But eventually, it'll be converted into the simplified script, and then it'll be made available to the mainland Chinese. I don't know how it'll be available to the mainland Chinese because I'm sure the book will be banned anyway. But an electronic copy, I think, I assume that maybe Tibetans will probably email them inside China. Okay.
Professor,
yeah.
Do you really believe that your presentations, paper documents, etc., has been read by both Mao Zedong and Dalai Lama?
Mao Zedong is dead.
Before.
What do you mean? My manuscript just appeared recently. How can?
Qing Dynasty, he was alive. After that, he died, no doubt. But what do you mean during his time? Has he gone through all your records or not?
I don't know. No. If you ask me personally, I'm sure many of the Chinese scholars and many people in the Chinese government, they are aware of this. Okay? It's just they prefer not to tell people and they just try to cover it up. I'm not saying that I'm the first Chinese who have discovered it. I mean, these things have been printed again. I've been stressing all the time. They have been printed, they have been made available in the websites for free, in the internet and so forth. Obviously, I'm not the only Chinese who have read it, but I'm one of the first Chinese that are pointing up publicly that, hey, wait a minute, there are these things. And the reason why I am able to do that is, again, I have explained it at the very beginning of my talk, is that number one, I'm retired. Number two, I'm an American citizen. Number three, I live in the United States. Number four, I'm independently, pardon, that I have independent income, so to speak. Okay, I don't have a job. Okay, number four and number six. Okay, as again, I pay for my expenses, my airfare, and whatever is that. Basically, I can say whatever I want. But most people can't afford to do that. If you're a professor working in an American and Chinese university in Chinese studies, if you do what I'm doing, you lose your job. Okay.
Professor, it is...
No, I'm not brave. I'm just saying I can afford to do it because I have nothing else to do. Okay, I'm retired. Okay.
Professor, as chair, to me this is Parliament, and as chair of this parliamentary session, it is time to adjourn for a break. And before we adjourn, I'd like to, I'm happy that your book will be released in Taiwan, because in Taipei, a city I'm familiar with, there's perhaps one of the best libraries, bookstores called Chanping, where I'm sure your book will be made available, where you should also perhaps give a reading. Because you do have people who would have read your book and come and then will ask you probing questions. Secondly, before we adjourn, you had mentioned the Opium War. To me, hilariously, that is an aspect of India's soft power. Because in Shanghai, there is the Opium Exchange, which is preserved as a monument, where it is acknowledged very clearly that the opium came from India. So to me, that is India's soft power in the 1800s. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll resume in 6:15.